Tonight, we face a confession so chilling, so devastating, that it forces us to confront the darkest truth of all. 7-month-old Emmanuel Haro, a baby who could barely sit up, whose cries should have been met with comfort, may have been silenced forever. Not by a stranger, not by fate, but by the very person meant to protect him. In a jail cell, behind cold concrete walls, Jake allegedly whispered the words no parent should ever speak. To a planted inmate, he confessed that Emmanuel was killed, that it was an accident, that he buried his tiny body, hidden away from the world, and yet Emmanuel has never been found. Ask yourself, what does it mean when a father buries the truth along with his child? What does it say about a system that had every warning, every chance to intervene, but instead looked the other way? This isn't just a confession, this is a haunting. A reminder that while the world debates evidence and courtroom strategies, a baby is still missing, and the silence surrounding him may be the loudest cry for justice we will ever hear. Stay with me, because tonight we are not just recounting words from a jail cell. We are uncovering what they mean for Emmanuel, for his family, and for a community that may never forgive itself. But before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel if you believe in fighting for justice. Because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice for those who cannot fight for themselves. We've just crossed 5,000 subscribers, all because of your support, and we need that same energy to reach 6,000, then 7,000, and then 10,000. So go ahead and drop your fingerprints on that subscribe button, and definitely where you're watching from, because wherever you are, the day this vision is fulfilled, I will send my appreciation straight to you. Let's keep building this community that stands and fights for justice together. A chilling twist has surfaced in the case of baby Emmanuel Haro. For months, the world has asked, where is Emmanuel? What really happened to him? And now, there may be an answer too dark to accept. Jake, the man at the very center of suspicion, has reportedly confessed, but not to police directly, not to a judge, not even to his family. No, he confessed to a cellmate. And not just any cellmate, a plant, an undercover inmate, carefully placed there by police to catch Jake in his most unguarded moments. What Jake allegedly admitted sends chills through every parent's heart, that he killed Emmanuel, that it was an accident, and that instead of seeking help, instead of calling for mercy, he buried his baby boy, alone, in the ground, hidden from the world, as if Emmanuel's life could simply be erased. But here's the part that breaks us all. Emmanuel's body has never been found. His voice was silenced before it ever had the chance to form words. And now, the only thing left are whispers, confessions traded in jail cells, tears shed by a community, and a justice system scrambling to separate truth from manipulation. Ask yourself this: how does a society allow a 7-month-old child, fragile, innocent, defenseless, to vanish into the shadows, only to be spoken of as a mistake, an accident, buried as though he never mattered? Tonight, we are pulling apart this confession, the method police used to get it, and what it truly means for Emmanuel's case moving forward. But more than that, we're asking the question no courtroom can answer. Who speaks for Emmanuel now? To understand the weight of this confession, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the day baby Emmanuel Haro disappeared. He was just 7 months old, an age where he could barely sit up without help, where his world was nothing more than soft lullabies and the warmth of a parent's arms. And yet, one day, he was gone, vanished, reported missing by the very people meant to protect him. From the moment the news broke, the community was stunned. A baby, missing? In many cases, neighbors could recall seeing him just days before, crying, sometimes with bruises unexplained. Whispers spread, questions mounted. But in the midst of those whispers, something darker was happening. Suspicion fell on Jake almost immediately. His words didn't line up. His story shifted. The timeline of Emmanuel's last moments blurred under scrutiny. But while investigators dug, while neighbors talked in hushed tones, the truth remained buried, just like Emmanuel, if Jake's confession is to be believed. And here is where the heartbreak cuts deepest. From the very beginning, the signs were there. The bruises, the crying, the arguments that neighbors overheard. The unease that lingered every time someone asked, "Is the baby okay?" But was anyone truly listening? Or did the world look away, just long enough for Emmanuel's suffering to continue, for his cries to fade into silence, for his life to end before it ever really began? This isn't just a case about what Jake may have done. It's about what we didn't do. It's about a society that notices pain, but too often waits until it's too late to act. Behind the thick walls of a jail cell, where secrets are supposed to stay buried, Jake let words slip that may change everything. Police had placed an undercover inmate, someone who wasn't really there by chance, but by design. A plant. A man instructed to sit, to listen, and to wait for Jake to open his mouth. And Jake did. Whether out of guilt, pride, or the crushing weight of silence, he spoke. What did he say? That it was an accident. That Emmanuel wasn't meant to die. That panic took over, and instead of calling for help, instead of running to the very people who could have saved a child's life, he chose to bury the baby's body. He admitted, at least in that dark whispered exchange, that he put Emmanuel in the ground. A baby gone, a man in a cell, and a confession whispered in the dark, never meant for the world to hear. But here is where the weight of the story presses down hardest. This wasn't a courtroom confession. This wasn't sworn testimony. It was the words of a man behind bars, spoken to someone he thought was another inmate, a plant. And so, we have to ask, can we believe it? Can we trust the words of someone who has already spun lies, already twisted timelines, already allowed a child's cries to go unanswered? There is an ethical tension here. Jailhouse confessions are controversial. Courts know it. Liars know it. They can be manipulated, coerced, fabricated. And yet, if what Jake said is true, then Emmanuel's story ends not in mystery, but in horror. Not with a disappearance, but with a tiny grave dug by the very hands that should have carried him to safety. And maybe the most devastating part isn't just that Jake may have confessed, but that Emmanuel in his final moments may have known only fear, only pain, only silence. And now, his voice depends on a confession whispered in the dark. Jake's words paint a picture of an accident, a mistake, a moment of panic that spiraled into something irreversible. But when we hold that version of events against the evidence, the cracks are impossible to ignore. Because Emmanuel wasn't just any child. He was a 7-month-old baby with a history written on his body. Reports of untreated bruises, signs of neglect, evidence of injuries that no infant should ever have to endure. How does accident fit into that? How do we reconcile months of pain with a single claim whispered in a cell? Jake says Emmanuel died by accident. But medical experts have already hinted that this baby was severely abused. Abuse leaves a pattern. It doesn't happen once. It repeats. It escalates. It destroys. So when Jake says accident, what he's really asking us to do is to forget the history Emmanuel carried in his tiny, fragile frame. And then there's the burial. Jake told the planted inmate he buried Emmanuel's body. But where? Law enforcement has searched. Families have pleaded. The community has turned fields, woods and ditches inside out, and still no body. If Jake buried Emmanuel, why hasn't that place been found? Is he hiding the truth, even in his so-called confession? Or is he dangling half-truths, hoping to control the story even from behind bars? And this isn't just about Jake. It's about every adult, every institution that looked away. Child Protective Services had warnings. Doctors raised alarms. Neighbors whispered about cries that lasted into the night. But still, Emmanuel was sent back home. Still, he was left with the very people who now stand accused of burying his life in silence. So we ask, was this an accident? Or was it the end of a chain of failures, parental, systemic, communal, that allowed Emmanuel's tiny life to be reduced to a jailhouse confession? Because if Jake's story doesn't line up with the evidence, then Emmanuel's truth is still buried. And every day it remains hidden. The weight of guilt doesn't just fall on Jake. It falls on us all. Inside the courtroom, Jake's whispered words to a planted inmate are already becoming ammunition. For prosecutors, it's a potential breakthrough, a confession however messy, however indirect. In their eyes, it is proof that Jake himself tied his hands to Emmanuel's fate. A man admitting, even in the shadows of a prison cell, that he killed and buried his own child. But defense attorneys will not let that go unchallenged. Their claim: manipulation. They'll argue that Jake was coerced, baited, cornered into speaking words he might not have meant. They'll say the confession is tainted, that the state planted the seed, and Jake only spoke out of fear, confusion, or desperation. And somewhere in that clash of arguments, a jury will have to decide. Was this the truth of a guilty conscience, or the rambling of a man tricked in his weakest moment? But here's the tragedy, the one thing no legal sparring can erase. At the heart of this case isn't a chess game between prosecutors and defense. It isn't strategy. It isn't about who wins or loses in front of 12 jurors. It's about a baby, a 7-month-old baby who cannot testify, cannot defend himself, cannot even be heard. Emmanuel's cries are long gone, and now, all that remains is the echo of his suffering, filtered through lawyers, judges, and courtroom technicalities. And that is where the guilt should strike us hardest. Because Emmanuel will never sit in that witness box. He will never point a finger, never describe what was done to him. His truth can only be told by the bruises on his skin, the silence of his missing body, and the fragments of confessions dragged out of shadows. The court may argue over what's admissible. They may fight over whether Jake was manipulated. But while the adults debate, Emmanuel's voice, his life, and his chance at justice hang in the balance. So when we talk about courtroom fallout, we cannot forget what's really falling apart. Not Jake's reputation, not legal strategy, but the fragile memory of a child who deserved so much more than to have his story decided by the technicalities of law. We have been talking about confessions, timelines, and courtrooms, but at the center of this nightmare is a tiny human being. Emmanuel Haro, 7 months old, fragile, innocent, completely defenseless. Rewind to the evidence. Bruises across a soft body, signs of neglect, malnutrition, unanswered cries that no one listened to in time. Every mark tells a story of pain, of fear, of a life that should have only known love. Now overlay Jake's words. I killed him, I buried him, it was an accident. Pause, let that sink in. A baby's suffering, reduced to a whispered confession, a tale told in secrecy, while the world remained unaware. And worse, it is possible that the moment Emmanuel was buried, the world buried him with him. The world's conscience covered in the same dirt, the same silence that hid his tiny body. Guilt is a heavy burden. Not just for Jake, not just for the parents, but for every adult who looked the other way. For every neighbor who assumed someone else would act. For every system that checked a box and sent Emmanuel back into harm's way. For every second the cries went unheard, the innocence of a baby was traded for silence. Ask yourself, if this is what we allowed to happen to Emmanuel, how many others might be suffering, while the world pretends to look away? Because in cases like this, silence isn't neutral, silence is complicity. And the dirt that may cover Emmanuel's body is mirrored by the dirt on a society that failed him. Now we step into the mind of a detective, not to judge lightly, but to dissect every shadow of truth in this case. The jailhouse confession is explosive, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Jake claims accident and panic, yet the evidence screams otherwise. Emmanuel was already showing signs of severe abuse. Each bruise, each cry ignored, each missed warning adds weight to the question, was this really an accident, or the inevitable culmination of months of neglect and cruelty? Timeline inconsistencies matter. Where was Emmanuel in the hours, days, and weeks leading up to his disappearance? Who else was present? How did warning signs go unheeded? These are not just questions, they are indictments of a system that allowed a 7-month-old to suffer in silence. Then there's the confession itself, spoken to a planted inmate, intended to manipulate, to elicit truth, but even manipulation can reveal cracks in a liar's armor. Jake's words are a confession, yes, but they are also a puzzle. Why confess in a whisper? Why to someone not officially documenting the exchange? And why now, after all the time that Emmanuel has already been silent? As DetectiveMax, I cannot ignore one fact: the human cost. Regardless of legal technicalities, the confessions, the planted witnesses, the story's heart is a tiny abused baby. And every misstep, every ignored warning, every delay in uncovering the truth adds layers of guilt, not just on the parents, but on everyone who failed Emmanuel. If justice is to be served, it cannot be just about convictions. It must be about acknowledging a life silenced, understanding the chain of neglect, and demanding accountability at every level. Because silence in cases like this is a crime in itself, the whispers have become a roar. Across social media, across neighborhoods, across families, people are asking the same question. How could this happen to Emmanuel? Neighbors speak in hushed tones, guilt heavy in their voices. We heard the cries, we saw the bruises, but we didn't act. That silence, so ordinary, so human, is now being weighed against a life that was lost to neglect and abuse. And the weight of that silence is crushing. Social media explodes with outrage. Posts demanding justice, shares pleading for accountability, hashtags trending, #Justice for Emmanuel, #No More Silence. And yet, alongside the calls for action, there are whispers of denial, of excuses, of not our responsibility. And that is where the guilt strikes hardest. Every second spent looking away, every moment of inaction, is part of the chain that allowed Emmanuel's suffering to continue. The world collectively was given a chance to act, and the silence became complicity. DetectiveMax reminds you, Emmanuel cannot speak. He cannot tell his story. It is up to us, the community, the witnesses, the public, to carry his voice forward. Every comment, every shared insight, every demand for accountability matters, because justice is not passive. It requires attention, outrage, and action. So ask yourself, in this case, were you a witness to silence, or a fighter for truth? Emmanuel's story is far from over. And if we remain quiet now, if we turn away again, we allow the same darkness that silenced him to thrive, stand, speak, demand. Because the next time a child's cries are ignored, it may be someone you love. Tonight, we've walked through the harrowing story of Emmanuel Haro, a 7-month-old baby, whose cries went unheard, whose suffering was ignored, and whose life became a silent battle between abuse, neglect, and secrecy. From the jailhouse confession, to the inconsistencies in parental accounts, to the failures of a system meant to protect him, one truth remains. Emmanuel's voice was silenced, but his story cannot be ignored. And here's the chilling thought. Every moment of inaction, every glance the other way, every unchecked warning, contributed to the nightmare he endured. This isn't just about parents. It's about every adult who had a chance to act, every neighbor, every system that failed, every one of us who must ask ourselves, what could I have done? DetectiveMax isn't here for clicks. We are here for justice. We will not be quiet until accountability is enforced, until Emmanuel's story is fully known, and until no child's cries go unheard again. Now it's your turn. Speak. Comment your thoughts. Share your suspicions. Join the community that refuses to let silence win. Because justice is not given, it is fought for, relentlessly until it is grounded. Emmanuel's voice may have been silenced, but together we can amplify it, and ensure that truth cannot be buried in silence.